He called an election 2 years ahead of time, but now Sri Lanka's president is struggling in a tough campaign with allegations of corruption and human rights violations. Will Sri Lankans keep Mahinda Rajapaksa in office for a third term? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zaidan. When Sri Lanka's president Mahinda Rajapaksa called an early election, he probably expected an easy victory. And until recently, there wasn't a single candidate who could mount a serious challenge to his rule. Rajapaksa has been the island nation's leader for almost a decade. But all of that changed when his friend and former health minister Mithripala Sirisena announced he too would be running for president. Sirisena's announcement dramatically changed the campaign. A victory for the president in Thursday's election is no longer guaranteed. Well, we'll get to our discussion in a moment, but first FERNANDEZ has this report from the Sri Lankan capital, Colombo.
A whirlwind campaign for the highest office in Sri Lanka. A farmer's son is taking on Mahinda Rajapaksa for the presidency.
In the next 72 hours, there's going to be an end to Rajapaksa's rule, and we're going to rebuild another government.
Rajapaksa announced that he would run after his government removed a two-term limit on the office. His government has been popular. Rajapaksa ended the country's long-running civil war with the Tamil rebels and won in 2009. But he is facing a challenge this time from former allies. Sirisena was once close to the president, and other former ministers have broken ranks to join him. The election was called 2 years early. It galvanized the opposition, bringing together very different parties under a common banner. Rajapaksa, however, appears confident of victory.
We will not let this country go backwards. We will not let it stagnate and regress. We suffered for 30 years, where we lived in fear and with suspicion.
After 10 years in power, Rajapaksa is facing criticism, allegations of nepotism, corruption and abuse of power, charges he denies. He's running a campaign promise of economic stability. Sirisena is promising to curb the recent powers of the presidency and boost the judiciary.
What was expected to be a one-horse race has turned out to be one of the most vibrant times in Sri Lankan politics. Whether the country's most popular leader or his former health secretary win the December 8th poll, analysts say it's been a good fight for democracy. FERNANDEZ, Al Jazeera, Colombo.
Well, Sri Lanka is still a politically divided country. Many of its minorities feel neglected by President Rajapaksa. An opposition candidate, Sirisena, has been trying to court their votes. The Sinhalese Buddhists are the majority, though, at just under 75%. Sri Lankan Tamils make up the next biggest ethnic group at around 11% of the population, while Muslims account for just over 9%. Let's bring our guests into the show at this point now. Joining us from Colombo, C.A. Chandraprema, political correspondent for Sri Lanka's The Island newspaper. From London, Alan Keenan, Sri Lanka project director at the International Crisis Group. And also from Colombo via Skype, Rajiva Wijisena, Member of Parliament and former head of the Peace Secretariat. Welcome to you all. If I could start actually with Rajiva, how serious a challenge do you think Rajapaksa is facing in these elections?
I think it's a very serious challenge for him. I mean, no polls at the moment that have come from outsiders.
Do you think he'll probably lose it?
The opposition candidate at the head. I think he will lose if there's a fair and free election. And I think what has been surprising is the range of support that the opposition candidate has received. I think it's as much now, according to recent poll, in rural areas as in the towns. And certainly you would find all the professionals are very much in favor of a change. And a lot of young people, we have a clear majority amongst the young. So I don't think there's much doubt that if there's a free election, the opposition candidate will win. But I also think that perhaps many elements in the Rajapaksa family have too much to lose. So there'll be a rather desperate attempt to make sure that he stays in power.
You emphasised a key word there, free and fair. We'll come to it in a moment, but I want to bring in the perspective of Chandra now. The analysis we're hearing from Rajiva there, whether you're talking about segments of the rural population, the youth, the professionals, it sounds like he's on his way out. Do you agree with that analysis?
No, I wouldn't agree with my friend Rajiva on that issue. I would feel that the incumbent president Mahinda Rajapaksa will be re-elected for a third term quite comfortably in a couple of days' time. And you know, I have heard a lot of hype about professionals and you know, sections of the rural population and all that supporting the opposition candidate. But you know, these hopes of block votes, as it were, are to a large extent unfounded. It's true that there would be a wide range of political forces supporting the opposition candidate. However, the range of forces, of political forces supporting the incumbent president is no less diverse.
All right.
You would find Muslim politicians, Tamil politicians from the north, professionals and large sections of the rural population supporting the president, and his magnetism is undoubted, his personal popularity is undoubted, and there's also the serious handicap that the opposition suffers from, in that they have fielded a person who was really a secondary level figure in the ruling party for years. He was just a regional leader. I mean, he has no real achievements to his credit. I mean, if you take the presidential election of 2010, it was a different scene altogether, because the opposition candidate, General Sarath Fonseca, was a war hero and a man who had many achievements to his credit, and he had a personality to match, and all those factors didn't see him through to the presidency. So I can't see
so you don't see
that happening now.
The opposition's going to pull it off this time. All right, understood. Let's bring in Alan to the discussion now. It does feel a little bit like you're looking into different crystal balls when you try and get a reading of who's ahead in this election race. Two polls by two universities, Colombo and Kelaniya, both giving very different projections. The only thing they agree on is that the winner will take 53%, but they disagree completely on who that winner is. How do we know who's really doing well?
Well, I don't think anyone knows, and unfortunately, I think the big question is, will we ever really know what the true outcome was after the fact, even because there has been such a slanted process so far. The government has, well, state resources have been used in massive quantities by Rajapaksa and his supporters. There's been a lot of violence, one of the most violent campaigns probably in Sri Lankan history. Almost all of the violence targeted at the opposition, with the police doing very little to stop it. So, of course, what happens on election day will be crucial. Will there be violence? Will there be intimidation? Will there be voter attempts at voter suppression? And then the question of the count, can that be guaranteed to be proper and credible? I think if, you know, in the best case scenario, things on election day will go pretty well. There won't be any major evidence of vote fraud, and you'll have a clear outcome. That's the best. But I think only on that case will we ever really know what the voters' intentions were, in fact.
All right, let's take that point back to Chandra, if we could, because we've heard from two guests now the concern about free elections. I mean, with such an entrenched Rajapaksa family in politics, can there be free and fair elections?
Oh, yes, I don't think there is basically any question about the electoral process in Sri Lanka. We have been changing governments quite regularly, and I don't think there is any basic mistrust of the electoral process.
But when you have, sorry to interrupt you, but when you have the army
try to cast doubts on
using state money to distribute pro-Rajapaksa propaganda, when you've got attacks on the opposition rallies, I mean, that does cast some doubt as to how free the elections or how routine the elections really are, does it not?
Yeah, I just heard what Mr. Keenan said, and I don't agree with that this is one of the most violent political campaigns in recent history. That's plain nonsense, because There have been certain incidents, no doubt. There were incidents like that at previous elections as well, but that has never skewed the result. And if a government is genuinely unpopular, there is no way for that government to be able to remain in power, because this country has got used to changing governments from time to time, and this has been going on for the past 80 odd years. We have had universal suffrage for the past 80 odd years, and this is pretty well entrenched. If a government is really unpopular, there's no way that they can simply hang on to power through acts of violence. It has never happened in the past. Now, if you take the regime of President Chandrika Kumaratunga.
Right, let's bring in Rajiv into the discussion here. Now, if, as you said, the way you see things, key segments of the population are turning against the incumbent president, why?
And he won by 58, I think, to 40 odd. But I think many things have changed. One thing is, in 2010, the war had just been won, and I think there was real gratitude to the president for having put an end to terrorism. But I think many people at the time expected, and I feel sometimes the president himself intended, to move towards an inclusive peace. But for many reasons, that hasn't happened. And, you know, it was quite obvious, for instance, in the last Northern Provincial Council election, that the vast majority of the people in the North did not vote for government. And many of us, I was involved in reconciliation, I kept telling him that his chief electoral advisor, his younger brother, thought pouring in cement was enough to win people's hearts and minds. And we kept saying, you've got to do more. You've got to take people into consultation. You've got to develop human resources. But all that was ignored. Then in the East, where government actually won the last provincial council election, the Muslims have been conclusively alienated by a rather extreme Buddhist group called the Mithripala Sirisena. And, I was pleased because when I called the president the last time we had a long conversation, I said, what they were doing in attacking mosques was absolutely wrong. And to my surprise, he agreed with me and claimed that the BBS was being funded by the Americans and the Norwegians to do him down. But then when I said, why does your brother fall for all their traps? He's the Secretary of Defense. He really had no answer. And there's been a complete failure to restrain that sort of extremism. But the Sinhalese population is really suffering under rising costs of living and what is widely perceived as excessive corruption and also mismanagement. I mean, this year, for the first time, many ministries were deprived of their budgets, and all the money was really given to the ministry headed by his brother. And you had a mad system of development projects where select members of parliament were given, up to 600 million rupees, and there's been no planning. So, for instance, when we had the floods, nothing had been done, despite plans being laid by the Ministry of Disaster Management to have done anything about that. And people have begun to realize that this sort of ad hoc crony government is really not delivering results. Now, I think one obvious fact is that Maithripala Sirisena's rallies have drawn massive crowds. And these have been people who made their way despite difficulties. Now, one leading politician, who was, I think, half thinking of coming over to us, said that the rallies for the president were large, but people have been bussed to them from all over the country. I mean, for instance, the Colombo newspaper office sent about 300 people in buses to the first rally. And people from the president's hometown were taken there. So I think the popularity is declining very, very clearly.
All right, let's ask Alan here. A couple of points have come up. The way that minorities are treated and their marginalisation. Let's start with that one. How is that perhaps eating away at the support, the potential support for the president in the upcoming elections?
Well, I think it's been clear for quite a while, quite a number of years, that the president was not going to get very many votes from Tamils, particularly the Tamils in the north and the east. He didn't do very well in the election when Fonseca was challenging him in 2010. He did even worse or his party did even worse in the provincial council elections last September. But the big shift, I think, has been among Muslims, who have been, as Professor Vijayasinghe just said, have been deeply alienated by this wave of attacks and a 2 to 3 year campaign by a variety of militant Buddhists, the best known of which is BBS, or Mithripala Sirisena. Mosques have been attacked, businesses burned out, people attacked on the streets, sort of a campaign of hate. and the government has failed to stop it. And indeed, there are some evidence that at least some elements of the government have been supportive of it. So I think the big shift came in December. I think the Muslim population was alienated, but that was finally had produced political results when the two main Muslim parties that were in the government throughout all this period decided to leave and endorse Sirisena. So I think this all comes back to the sort of triumphalism at the end of the war, which, while sort of happiness at the defeat of the LTT is understandable, particularly for Sinhalese, the way in which that translated into a sense that this was only, Sri Lanka was only a Sinhala Buddhist country, and that the others, the Tamils, the Christians, the Muslims, could remain but as second-class citizens. I think that message has been sent in various ways and has had the effect of deeply alienating all those populations.
Chandra, in addition to minorities, let's talk about the Sinhalese majority themselves. Do you see that the support is being eaten away there by the rising cost of living that Rajiva was talking about, the lack of the economic benefits of growth, you know, which has been achieved under the president's rule, but that not trickling down to the grassroots? Do you see any evidence of that turning into an erosion of support amongst even the majority Sinhalese?
Well, there is always an anti-incumbency factor at any election for any political party that has wielded power. However, I wouldn't see that as a major factor at this election, because the benefits of the development that we have seen over the past 3 or 4 years or more, really, has really been percolating down to the grassroots level in various ways, either in terms of increased convenience or in terms of an increase in incomes. I mean, that have been happening. I mean, you can see from the statistics relating to the poverty levels, it has been in steady decline over the past several years. And then I would like to make an additional comment about the minority vote. Now, due to the alliances that were formed in this country prior to the 2005 election, at which the incumbent President Mahinda Rajapaksa was elected for the first time, the fact is that the Muslim parties ended up really supporting the United National Party candidate, and thereafter the common opposition candidate. So the Muslim vote was really never with Mahinda Rajapaksa. I mean, at least as far as the Muslim political parties are concerned, the main parties, the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress and its offshoot, the All Ceylon Makkal Congress, their vote was really never with President Rajapaksa. So the fact that they are not there at this election supporting President Rajapaksa will be really no different to the previous two elections.
It's not a significant factor.
Very convincingly.
All right, let's bring in Rajiva.
Rishad, the ACMC.
No, it is a significant. It is certainly a significant factor in terms of in electoral terms.
Yeah.
Okay, Rajiva.
The point is, what you said was not entirely accurate, because Rishad was totally behind the government in 2010. And as you know, he has perhaps larger influence amongst the northern Muslims.
Yeah, Rishad is a minor,
and also the Muslims in the
very minor offshoot.
Okay, hang on, Rajiva. Let's give Chandra 15 seconds.
Yeah, I'd like to make an addition to that. Rishad was a minor factor among the Muslim parties. I mean, if that is the case, then one can always say that figures like MLM Hizbullah, then ALM Ataullah, and several other Muslim leaders like that are with the government. But the real major factor is the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress.
All right, you've made your point. Rajiva, you know what, it's easy. There is an incumbent or incumbency factor, isn't there? I mean, it is easy to always sit and point fingers at anyone who's currently in power. But let's turn the question around and ask, what's the alternative? Does Sirisena represent a better way forward for minorities? Would he be able to mend fences with the Tamils or the Muslims when, you know, he's allied with the Buddhist Nationalist Party, which denies that there were mass Tamil civilian casualties at the end of the war? He's never condemned. He's even on the record as saying there will be no human rights trials of politicians over, you know, war crimes allegations. I mean, What sort of a break does he offer from the current president?
Well, I mean, I deny that there were massive civilian casualties during the war. I mean, what I've always said, and I stand by this still, is that comparatively speaking, we fought a very clean war. But as our own Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission said, there were certain questions with regard to, particularly after the war, which needed further investigation.
That still leaves you in opposition to some of the UN bodies which are calling for an independent investigation because they feel that the internal process wasn't entirely reliable.
Very sorry, but the UN bodies have asked for an independent investigation, which we have done. I mean, I myself have said very clearly that we needed a domestic investigation. I do not think only international investigations are independent. In fact, some of them aren't. But we have always said that Sri Lanka needed a credible domestic investigation. And, when the LSRC report came out, we thought Mahinda Rajapaksa would do it. But unfortunately, he didn't do it. And therefore, we have now got this vote against us in Geneva only this time, in 2014. Earlier, they kept saying have a credible domestic investigation. And we should have done this. Mithripala Sirisena has said very clearly that will happen. But the president himself said this because the Disappearances Commission mandate was expanded to have such an investigation. But unfortunately, because of the long delays, there is a sense that an investigation conducted by Mahinda Rajapaksa will not be independent. But leave that question aside. The other question you asked is perhaps the more important one. Does Sirisena represent a change? And certainly, the SLFP per se, which Sirisena represents, is a moderate party. Over the last 4 years, I've kept telling the president to move on his promises. And he kept telling me, well, I won't get a majority. And I said, you can trust the SLFP. They are moderate. It's his newfound allies who are extremists, who have really stood against things. And Mithripala Sirisena certainly, I've done a lot of work in the North and East in the last 2 years. I've written to a lot of ministers about the problems put forward by the people. And some ministries don't respond. Others do respond, take no action. It was health. Maybe it wasn't him, maybe it was the doctors in charge who actually did respond, which is why the people in the North have far fewer complaints for interrupting here because than anything else.
Mr. Rajiv, we've got only a couple of minutes left, so I want to give Alan a chance to get a word in here. Let's look at the economic situation. There has been growth under President Rajapaksa, hasn't there? How much of that might change if indeed the opposition, the common opposition candidate, Mr. Sirisena, comes to power? We know that he's already vowing to cancel some big contracts with China, isn't he?
Yes, I think they've said they will cancel the contract for the Colombo port city, which is a large project, Chinese funded. Also, I think they've called for the cancellation of a casino, a bill that has allowed casinos, foreign casinos to come in, which the Buddhist Nationalist Party, the JHU, is particularly opposed to. I suspect economic policy will remain pretty much the way it is now. The constraints on any government in the world to pursue, generally sort of market-friendly policies and development policy as set by international financiers is, I think, pretty clear. I think in general there may be a bit more less clarity in some other policies, just given the disparate nature of the group of parties that are backing Sirisena. But I think the big question, which hasn't been addressed yet, I think the most important aspect of Sirisena's challenge and his proposals are the constitutional changes and the other governance changes designed to restore the balance of power, to put checks on the executive. So he's calling for executive powers to be reduced, for the independence of the judiciary to be restored, independent institutions, commissions that oversee the police, the civil service, etc., to be restored. And I think those are would be major improvements and would really sort of open up democratic space, which has been closed considerably under the Rajapaksa regime.
Right, all right, so a lot of issues to be addressed. Let's thank our guests, though, at this point. C.A. Chandraprema, Alan Keenan and Rajiva Wijayasena. And let us know your thoughts about this show and any others. You can post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or contact us on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. I'm Sami Zaidan for now. Thanks for watching.